Ron's literary mission is inherently noble. At the time when our nation feels tortured by division, he dares to write about healing, resilience, and even the possibility of unity. Ron, he's real, he's open to listening and learning, and he's noble. Join me in welcoming Ron Chapman.
That was Suzanne Sheely Walker, who forgot to introduce herself. My favorite stalker. So now's the time when I'm supposed to share. Some of you know I had a very long-time mentor I refer to as Master Samwise. He was a sponsor for 27 years, but also a life mentor. And he used to say, particularly after an introduction like that, which was really beautiful, Suzanne, thank you, said, Ron, just make an ass of yourself real quickly, and then you can get over yourself and do what you're really there to do. So I always share that story because, like, okay, I know I'm an ass, and that's okay. We can work with that. First, a couple of things I want to say. First of all, Suzanne has been such a help with promotional work and just remarkable. And back in the back holding a camera is a woman named Monique, who I discovered at the CDC 15 years ago, and she's the best damn handler I've ever met. And so she's been handling me for the past decade, which means she keeps me on track. And back here on the camera is my son-in-law, Shenandoah. Unfortunately, my daughter got sick tonight, so he's been keeping tabs on me for a long time. And a lot of you wanted to meet my partner, Felisa, who's back here. You can wave, Felisa, because some of you have never met her. And I thought, well, okay, perfect occasion to do that. I was talking to my friend Craig here about how weird it is in some ways to see the various mashups of the people that I'm so close to in so many ways. My World of the Moth is here. Friends Who Raise Goats are here. Yeah, I wrote a book about goats too, so there's that. Toastmasters is here. A lot of CDC clients, friends. That's my phone. People from the recovery community, because I'm a very long time sober, which is a really important piece of this whole deal. And Acapella Books has agreed to support us as well, so thank you for that as well, Kyle. Let me tell you very briefly about the backstory here. Some of you don't know the backstory. It started when I corresponded with a serial killer a number of years ago, real serial killer. He was put to death for his crimes, but not before he gave me permission to use any of his story as long as I kept him completely fictional. He wanted no more harm to come to the families of his victims. And he told me a profound story, which is In a Killer's Grace. And it took me about a decade to figure out how to tell that story. And I'll let you read the book. It's not about the serial killer. That sets the scene for what is a story of trauma and trauma recovery for a recovering alcoholic and his partner. And when that book published, my first reviewer said it was a work of art and that I created a whole new genre, the psycho-spiritual thriller. And very few authors can say they've created their own genre. So my ego kind of went overtime on that. But then he said, I can't wait for the sequel. And I said, oh, damn, there's a sequel. And I had no idea what to do with that. I really thought it was a one and done. And then that story came together, and it was about this most profound concept called post-traumatic growth. The dark side of grace is about how terrible things can transform people's lives and transform cultures. And the longer you dive into it, the more remarkable it is that some of the most awful things in the world turn out to be so transformative and beneficial. I'm living proof of that as an alcoholic who really should be dead. I mean, I've lived that experience, as have others, in a variety of ways. So when that one was done, I realized, like, oh, there's like a whole storyline going on here, which we now call the Saga of Grace. And one of my friends, I think I'm trying to remember who did this, Gail, in the WOW work group, book group, but somebody said, this ain't your mama's Grace, Ron. I said, yeah, I know, it's gnarly, it's dark, it's difficult, because it's part of the conception, which I'll talk a little bit about. So the next step in the story is the Reckoning of Grace, the new book, which is about transcendence, spiritual transcendence. And as it turns out, it's very timely. I got my first MAGA attack yesterday. For things that are online, for things that are in the book, trying to tell the truth. And I figure, okay, let's say that honestly too, that it's offensive to some people because some of the things in here don't make some people look very good. And I'll read just a little bit of that. So now I officially have 2 complaints because I got the second attack today. So I now have 2 reports with the FBI. which will be in the fourth book, right? So it's like if you know me, you know you're going to end up in one of my books. So just be careful what you tell me. So what I wanted to do was read a little bit to set the scene, and then to sort of give you a sense of where this goes. It starts out, all of my books include an aspect of the transcendent, an omniscient point of view, and this one opens that way as well. But I'm going to skip that part. It also closes that way because, if you believe there's some kind of a higher power, then there's some kind of a viewpoint from some omniscient perspective that looks down upon all this mess. And who knows what that may mean. But I like to weave that in because it gives this entirely different feel. But where I want to start tonight is with the one that got me a little bit of attack stuff going on. So this is in the prelude. Amid a dramatic increase in vitriol and violence, the presidential election of Donald Trump in 2024 was devastating to many. Indeed, it would set the scene for a terrible descent on the way to what would become a societal rock bottom. Many ordinary and not so ordinary people would be singled out for retribution by not just those in elected office, but also those enabled by the not so subtle violence they advocated. Countless people who had been labeled as other would be tragically affected, whether in the vast sweep of illegal immigrants held in detention camps, the reversion of rights for those in the margins, as well as those not so marginalized, or the increase in right-wing mobs claiming mandates to harm those with different beliefs. But a rising up of ordinary women and men, loosely organized into a movement, provided a perfect counterbalance. What some would come to call a great spiritual transformation would emerge amid the cultural wastelands. Behind the veils of the world, small groups of devoted spiritual practitioners continued to practice, adding psychic fuel. They would come to be known as a new generation of desert mothers and fathers. One of the first reviews I got was, how could you know that this was going to be happening right now while the book was released? And I said, well, I didn't, but you can kind of trace the pathway for how things ripple through the culture. And what I'm particularly pleased about, which I will get to, is that I know that everybody's writing dystopian stories about where we're headed. I don't believe that's true. And by the time we're done, I'm going to tell you why I think that, because I think there's a lot of really cool stuff going on, but that's political commentary at this point. So let me continue reading. For those of you who don't know, my primary character is Kevin Pitcairn. He's an investigative journalist in Albuquerque, New Mexico, known as Pitcairn. He's a long time in recovery, terrible history of violence. He's the main driver for transformation in the storyline. And he's got this great partner, Maria Elena Maldonado, known as Emmy to him, their initials, who in fact is becoming, in the second book, a co-protagonist. The first book was really about Pitcairn's march through trauma. The second book, Dark Side of Grace, was really watching Maria Elena step into this space because there's a parallel track that's going on. And so in the third book, they are together in transcendence. That's kind of what goes on here, and I have a whole spiritual philosophy behind that you'll find in the book. But it starts this way as we move into chapter 1. For those of you who don't know, there's an actual real place in New Mexico. I fictionalized it. It's the place where they send priests who've broken society's covenants to be restored. And I've relocated it to another place, but it's known in here as the Community of the Blessed. And I call it that because this is a group of men and women who have decided that the world is a better place if they sanction themselves and remove themselves from society in hopes that they will someday be healed. And so it's a real place, and I was so profoundly struck by the fact that could people be so wise. And so this starts there with the Community of the Blessed. Brother Samuel gave his life for Pitcairn and Maria Elena that day as he crumpled to the earth. A large caliber bullet ripped through his neck, draining life through severed arteries. One moment he had been tending to his goat herd, proudly introducing each of them by name. Moments later he was dead after stepping between his two visitors and a barrel-shaped man in camouflage gear who had stormed over a brush-shrouded hill with automatic weapon in hand, intent on killing Pitcairn and Maria Elena for trying to destroy the world he believed in. beneath massive blood-red slabs of sandstone split by dark, beautiful rifts in the rock. The devoted brother had rushed toward the gunman. He'd managed to grasp the man in the final act of his life and tumble with him to the ground. 2 other members of the community of the blessed rushed forward and subdued the violent man. Almost immediately, the goats had encircled their fallen, lifeless shepherd. Beside him, Maria Elena wept. Pitcairn stood in a devastating reverie beneath the towering beauty that surrounded them. As a man who vacillated between agnosticism and atheism, there was a deep, powerful, incomprehensible stillness that enveloped him. He would later write in his weekly commentary in the Albuquerque Chronicle, "There at the Ponderosa Sanctuary, deep in the Zuni Mountains, in what the spiritual residents call the community of the blessed, a heartbreaking reality scarred the pastoral setting." A self-acknowledged child molester, Brother Samuel, who decades ago took refuge in that community along with other religious persons to protect children and others from their unacceptable behaviors, died from a gunshot wound in an extraordinarily pastoral scene. He perished to save me and my beloved Maria Elena. A good man who had flaws like all of us is now gone from the earth. And another man, the attacker, deeply disturbed by what he believed to be true, has had his life ruined in prison. In the words of Father Anthony DeFranco, a longtime mentor, well known for his work through the Center for Enlightened Spirituality, quote, "Grace is so often thought to be forgiving and kind, yet it must include all things, not only those of beauty and comfort. It cannot be grace if it is not also accorded the killer and the killing." Marilene and I were somehow saved through this entangled web. How can one ever reconcile such circumstances? How can one possibly repay such a life-affirming gift? How can we come to peace amid such ugliness? So the thinking as the author is, and it's happened in each of the books, is I want to very quickly drop us into an ugly reality. A friend of mine says, because grace can't just be daisies, rainbows, and unicorns. Somehow or another, it's got to include everything. And so this is immediately pushing into that. And even Pitcairn's line here, grace is so often thought to be forgiving and kind, yet it must include all things, not just those of beauty and comfort. It cannot be grace if it is not also accorded the killer and the killing. And for those of you who've been following this, you know that Father Anthony DeFranco was heavily influenced by Father Richard Rohr, who runs the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, and has his own sort of profound body of mystical Catholicism that, he knows I write about him. I've never heard what he thinks, but it's a very flattering look at a really pretty extraordinary contemporary man of faith. So what we do is we jump in. What this ends up doing is it sends Pitcairn and Maria Elena into isolation. What I opened with was that idea that there are spiritual practitioners somewhere behind the veil of the world. And by the way, I know some of these. They go into refuge, trying to be safe. And what they encounter is actually a very remarkable thing. But I'll get to that in a moment by telling you a little bit about one of the healers they encounter. But Pitcairn wrote this in a commentary that he published after they were beginning to move into refuge. As a journalist and social commentator, this is Pitcairn speaking, I'm often asked what it might take to reach a tipping point, a notion framed by the author Malcolm Gladwell that signifies the moment when the cultural tides turn. As a recovering alcoholic who has seen the extraordinary transformational power of hitting bottom, I must admit sometimes it takes terrible destruction, pain, and suffering to galvanize a new direction. In that sense, all this awful and ugly reality we are experiencing is actually a great gift, though it is not easy to see. It is through a collective rock bottom that enough voices will rise to turn the tide. Beauty and transformation still live within that vortex of violence, though the cost can be distressingly high. I believe this is the moral arc of justice of which the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke, though in all truth, that moral arc may very well lie on the other side of carnage. So I want to frame that real quickly. Probably from a contemporary point of view, And by the way, if you haven't been to Montgomery, Alabama, and gone to the lynching, so-called lynching memorial, gone to the Legacy Museum, gone to the sculpture garden, it's a must-do. It's just a must-do. It'll break your heart and open. And then you need to drive out to Selma, which is what Felicia and I did not too long ago, because if you think back to what happened, so all that stuff, I mean, 80 years of Jim Crow, right? Let's just be honest. It was ugly. And a lot of ugly transpired even leading up to Selma. But what happened in Selma, for all intent, or that range of time, it wasn't just Selma, was what happened was essentially people took an ugly look at all of that and said, this must change. And if you visit LBJ's library in Austin, Texas, and read what he accomplished after Selma, I got chills. It is a transformational story of voting rights, racial equity, the Great Society. And remember, he was a conservative Democrat from Texas. And he realized there was a moment in which every opportunity needed to be seized. And we've been living under that since, the 1960s. So it came out of awful things, and yet it was so transformative. So I mentioned, I want to get to the optimistic part because some of this just sounds so dark. But let's be honest, it's kind of like dark. So they get to refuge, and they meet a woman who is inspired by a dear friend of mine. Her name is Ellen. She's a mixed race woman, would be referred to as a curandera in southwestern lore, Hispanic healer, or she might be called a shaman, if that is the frame of reference you're taking. She's an interesting character because there's a lot of things she does, not unlike Pitcairn, that will cause people to wonder, like, what the heck does she really believe? But in the very next to last chapter, she will finally reveal to you what is in the heart of what she believes. But this is her story. She says to Pitcairn and Maria Elena, "You are in your own recovery, so let me start with my story." She closed her eyes to collect herself. Then Ellen spoke softly. "Looking behind, I am filled with gratitude. Looking forward, I am filled with vision. Looking upward, I am filled with strength." Ellen opened her eyes and gazed at them. "That is a Quero Apache prayer. I recite it as a reminder of who I am and where I stand." Maria Elena commented that it's so beautiful and fitting. Ellen smiled broadly, especially because my true story begins when I was gang raped when I was 19 years old. Maria Elena gasped, and Pitcairn felt a stab of heartache as he leaned toward her. But Ellen immediately raised her hands in a gracious, open-handed gesture, then looked at Pitcairn. It was the direct cause of what you would call post-traumatic growth. I am a shaman and curandera because of it. I am a wounded healer because of it. You both have come here to learn because of that brutality. Yet to tell the whole story, I am healed because others brought healing into me, which I can now pass on to others. There was a stillness that hung in the room. The details no longer matter, Ellen said. I was in Tucson, in the wrong place at the wrong time. She shrugged then. Or, my true story is, I was in the right place at the right time. Though it was terrible. I was disembodied. The experts would say I disassociated. I watched the rape from outside myself. Then I was lost to myself for a few years. Lost to yourself? Pitcairn asked. She nodded. I can tell you where I was and what I was doing, but the trauma disconnected me. And an old Mexican woman, Carmen, who was a healer, saw me on the streets one day and took me into her home. Along with a collection of others steeped in traditional practices, she found my spirit and brought it back to me. They taught me everything they knew. They sheltered me for years, including the 6 years it took me to complete undergraduate studies in nutrition. She smiled with a twinkle in her eyes. The professors taught me the science. The circle of healers taught me traditional ways, as well as some non-traditional ways they had discovered. All the while, they worked to restore spirit in and through me. So she's an encapsulation of the transformation from trauma into this remarkable transformational growth. And in the Jungian psychology, they talk about the wounded healer archetype, that is only those who have been wounded who can truly heal. And so she's an example. And I have several amazing examples of this in my life. People that I have known who've just, I'd mention names, but they would be embarrassed. Some of you know them as well. They've come through remarkable transformations as a result of hardship. And that's the part I really want to honor. If you're a Buddhist and you like Pema Chodron, she's well known for saying you should lean into the sharp points, which sounds really unpleasant. And yet leaning into the sharp points is where things begin to happen, even though we want to avoid them so much. So they go through this whole process. And of course, there is going to come a time when you just need to know they do come out of seclusion and things do begin to happen. Here's a little bit of foreshadowing. 2 big events happen. One of them is on Stone Mountain. The other one is at the Martin Luther King Jr. Historical site. And that's the teaser. You won't find that out until you read the book. So there you go. Don't want to ruin the plot. But there's a moment where they have moved through a lot of this difficulty. And Ellen is working with them still further. And she says this. She reads to them from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, from a piece called A Simple Prayer for Remembering. We do not become healers. We came as healers. We are. Some of us are still catching up to what we are. We do not become storytellers. We came as carriers of stories, and our ancestors actually lived. We are. Some of us are still catching up. We do not become artists. We came as artists. We are. Some of us are still catching up to what we are. We do not become writers, dancers, musicians, helpers, peacemakers. We came that way. We are those. Some of us are still catching up. We do not learn to love in the same sense. We came as love. We are love. We are still catching up to who we truly are. And then there's a site. Some of you know Jeff Brown. I stole some of his material because Sam would always tell me, if somebody's already written good stuff, just use it. Because give him credit, but use it. So I quote him here. Jeff Brown says, we must not give up. It takes so much to heal because we are not just healing our own wounds. We are healing the world's wounds too. We think we are alone with our stuff, but we aren't. With every bit of healing of our emotional debris, with every foray into a healthier way of being, with every excavation and release of old material, we heal the collective heart. So many of our familial and karmic ancestors had little opportunity to heal their pains. When we heal, their spirits breathe a sigh of relief. We heal them backwards while healing ourselves forward. We heal in unison. So on the other side of all this difficult stuff, there's this, if there's a theme in the book, and some of you probably already saw some stickers back there, that hurt people, healed people, heal people, and transformed people, change the world. And if there's a punchline, be one of the healed ones, like soon, right? Father Richard Rohr says it so very well. That which is unhealed within us, we will project outside of ourselves and do harm. And so this is a call to inner healing through which outer healing will manifest, which fits into a number of models. So what often happens, people will say, okay, this is all well and fine. This is all ugly. Like, what does this mean for us? So I want to tell you, I spent a little time after I did the release event in Albuquerque. And I'll have one more reading and we can talk about this. So the first thing I want to say is there are tipping points. I think we're approaching one, a societal tipping point. Don't know what it looks like. They're unpredictable. They're black swan events, as they're called. We have some reference points for this. Selma, as I mentioned, was a tipping point. That whole era was a tipping point. 9/11 was a missed opportunity for a tipping point. There was an opportunity for giant strides forward, and it just wasn't possible. But nevertheless, there was a tipping point there where things could have been profoundly changed. So what I want to think about, and would like you all to think about, is this idea that breakdown can lead to breakthrough once we hit the tipping point. And ideally, I'd like you to be healed as part of the tipping point, because better things will come about as a result of that. The second thing that I think is a big take home from this story and sort of the whole framework. In trying to figure out how to write number 4, this sounds terribly arrogant, but I'm feeling like Dion and I were talking about this. Like I have to write a manifesto, which sounds like really over the top. But there's a whole kind of way of thinking about this, and a central piece of that is this nature of grace. I know we want to just look at the good stuff, but when you look deeper and deeper and deeper, when you ask anybody you know about how they changed their life, they're not going to tell you it was tulips. That's not what they're going to tell you. Whatever difficult thing, they're going to tell you something that happened, probably facilitated by someone who loved them, and then they're going to tell you about how it came out. There's a joke in the world of Toastmasters about nobody wants to hear from the stage how everything was fine. They want to hear your heroic descent followed by your heroic ascent and how it is that came to pass and what they can learn from that. But it's so hard to consider. So I want to tell you a real life story out of New Mexico. There's a little village in northern New Mexico, Chimayo. Some of you may know it because of the chapel at Chimayo, which has holy earth. People go there for healing and have for generations. At one point in time, Chimayo was completely taken over by the drug trade, mostly opioids. And it was destroying the community. And one day, a grandmother, backed up by some other women, went to the spiritual leaders of the community and said, "Where are you? Our babies are dying. Where are you? It's destroying our community." And 6 months passed and nothing happened. And then one day, the spiritual leaders of the community marched through the city and they swept the drug trade out of town, and it is gone to this day. And the grandmother went back to the leader and said, "Why did it take you 6 months?" And he said, "We had to clean the drugs out of our community first. We could not do it in Chimayo without first healing ourselves." That's the story, right? Have to start there. You cannot lead with authority. You cannot heal with authority without doing your own healing work. At the same time, we have to work in the world. So the nature of grace is not at all what a lot of us seem to think it is. And then I already said this, I'm going to repeat it. Heal people, heal people. Be one today. That's kind of the whole take home. And my favorite example of this continues to be one of the most admirable characters in our very contemporary times was Nelson Mandela. Went into prison as a labeled terrorist, 27 years, breaking rocks. I was on Robben Island a few years ago with my daughter looking at that little square that he lived in for 27 years. And yet if you follow he wasn't a perfect man, but between him and Desmond Tutu, I mean, Nelson Mandela came out, there was something that happened to that guy. There was something that happened to him, and the result was he established truth and reconciliation. He did a number of things that would seem impossible. And of course, they haven't been entirely successful at holding on to it. But that doesn't diminish what happened to Nelson Mandela and the power of that. And it didn't come out of rainbows and daisies and unicorns. It came out of 27 years breaking rocks. So those are like the 3 points I think are really important. One is that there are tipping points, and it is my assessment we're moving towards one. We just don't know when it is. That the nature of grace is not what we thought it is. It involves these difficult, challenging things that we're being invited to do something with. And the third part is to become a healed person, because then something can come through us. Again, it's the wounded healer archetype. So I want to read one more thing, and then we're going to chat about whatever you all want to chat about. Some of you probably remember from the first books that Pitcairn had a sponsor. He's modeled somewhat on Sam in my life, a guy named Clint, who was from East New Mexico, which is kind of West Texas. And he was a kind of a good old boy, wise man. And in the back end of the book, Pitcairn flashes back. If you study the structure of these 3 books, what you're going to see is there comes a transcendent moment in each of them for Pitcairn and Maria Elena. And by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't say what particularly tickles me about where this thing goes is it reflects the emergence of what's known as the sacred or divine feminine. That there's a sacred energy in the world which is a feminine energy that I should write a whole other book about that, but I'll stop right there. So anyway, that also weaves into this, which is how Maria Elena becomes a co-protagonist. So Pitcairn has a flashback. He's talking to Father Tony, and he says this. This is Pitcairn. Clint was talking me through some difficult things, which included a great deal of my guilt and shame. He told me, "Pitcairn, your best just has to be good enough." Best? I asked him. Pitcairn, he said. Given any time, place, and circumstance, none of us can do any better in any given moment. Maybe in what follows that moment, but never in that exact moment. Tony, I can't get my head around it, he chuckled. I couldn't then. And then Clint hit me with it. Pitcairn, it doesn't matter if you understand this idea of the best. Every moment, no matter what you think of it and no matter what you do, is still your best moment in that place and time. That's why it has to always be good enough. Tony says, there it is again, a universal truth for all of us. To which Pitcairn responded, thank you, Tony. I am such a fortunate man. So, if there's a theme that runs through this that I need to call out, it's the idea that was introduced in A Killer's Grace, that there's an inherent innocence we each carry with us no matter what. That all of us are doing the best we can in any given moment. And if you go deep into Scripture, deep into most of the practices in all kinds of places, this is like the 70 times 7 forgiveness thing. This is the letting them off the hook and let ourselves off the hook. This is the non-judgment place. This is the radical curiosity where we look at those things. And all the masters all told us you're not going to do that by hanging out with your good friends who don't ever go cross with you. You're going to do it by these difficult, challenging relationships where trying to forgive, trying to let go, trying to be okay is just not an easy thing. And yet, that's what we see as the magic elixir. And so this last piece here with Pitcairn is Clint letting him know that no matter what, we're all okay, and we're doing the very best we know how. But it's just kind of hard to see sometimes. So with that, I have no idea if I stayed on time or not, Monique, but it looks like I'm close. She gave me a thumbs up. That's good. They actually have cards back there, red cards. They're supposed to like, okay, Ron, stop talking because you've blown past your timing cues. So now's the time to talk about any of these books, any things I just talked about, things you're wondering about, where you are in your own personal adventures with this stuff. Let's talk a little bit because my goal isn't just to sell you some books and talk about them. My goal with every time I do this is I want to facilitate people getting healed. Because I know, I have watched it over and over again. As you get healed, you will heal those around you, and that's how the world will get healed in this messy time. So I'm happy to talk about anything in that space. I promised a few of my friends from the CDC they would hear my heretical material that I was never able to talk about there. By the way, I got doged last spring. 35 different contracts evaporated over a course of a few weeks. So I'm in a sabbatical now. And nobody's watching, well, except MAGA. MAGA's watching me, but those people aren't watching me. So anyway, what are you wondering about? By the way, the acoustics in here are extraordinary. So we should all be able to hear